Okay, here we are. What's up, YouTube? You know me, and I'm here today sharing my time with an exceptional human being that I've had the honor and blessing to discover his work. And his name is Mike Williams, and he also goes by Sage of Quai, if I didn't slaughter that pronunciation.
Sage of Quay.
Quay. All right, sorry.
Close enough, Mark.
Close enough. Quay. Okay. Um, yeah, man. If there's time today, I'd love to hear about how you earned that moniker or where that came from. But essentially, yeah, we've assembled today to discuss the Paul is Dead community and some of the broader implications of that story. So I wanted to just maybe take a couple minutes to talk about who we are and how we got here briefly. For my part, I've been inundated with the Beatles myth and Beatles lore and Beatles fanfare my entire life. My initials are EMI. My birthday is June 18th. My parents met at a meditation group in Manhattan in the 70s that were disciples of Edgar Casey's teaching. And the woman who ran that group was a woman named Marlene, who was one of John and Yoko's advisors. So via that connection, my father was asked to help Yoko with some projects, and he went over to the Dakota when John was still alive. So that there's a lot of stories for me and a lot of legacy and heritage as to what the Beatles mean. And 20 years ago, my whole worldview was radically changed when I ended up studying the 9/11 truth movement. And 20 years later, I have the same type of feeling and intuition about studying this work because essentially both are diagrams of how things really work. And you've mentioned that several times in the work I've, taken a deep dive into your work on YouTube and a bit on BitChute. And yeah, I know that you're sitting with that understanding as well, that these topics are more than just the fact that Paul McCartney was murdered and replaced, which of course is significant, but the actual real like core of the story goes so far beyond who Paul McCartney was and who Billy Shears is and so on.
Yeah. So I've said on many shows, Mark, that the replacement of Paul McCartney is a subplot within the overall Beatles conspiracy. It's not that Paul being replaced is not important. It is important, but the the conspiracy surrounding the Beatles has everything to do with a massive social engineering initiative that put the wheels in motion for the counterculture to really get some traction and to move forward. So that's the piece of it that a lot of people don't really grab onto. The reason for that is because if you resonate with that aspect of it, meaning that the Beatles were a huge social engineering initiative, then that means the Beatles were not organic and the Beatles were created. And a lot of people don't want to go there. Even a lot of people, most people in the Paul is Dead community, because they still want to hold on to the fairy tale, the
Right.
Cinderella story of the Beatles, that they were organic and they were magical. And these four guys had this chemistry and they wrote all these songs and they played on all of their recorded tracks. And they just want to hold on to that. However, when you shift gears and you go deeper, that piece of the story falls apart.
Right.
And a lot of people, again, within the Paul is Dead community and other Paul is Dead researchers or Beatles researchers, and people outside of the community, they just don't want to go there. They don't want to hear it. They want to continue to embrace that story because, let's face it, it's a really good story. It's a great story. Um, and who doesn't like a happy story, a feel good story?
Right.
Everybody loves one, right? But we have to really get down to what is the truth. And a lot of times, the truth is not something that's going to make you happy, but it's something that's necessary in order for you to realign your life and reconsider how you're going to go about things in your life. You have to
Yeah,
move the deception off the table.
absolutely, man. The thing is that this topic is a master class in social emotional intelligence because it's beyond the Beatle worship and Paulism too. in the sense that we need to learn how to distinguish the layers of people's identities. I mean, how common is it in society that people talk about somebody at 20, 24, 25, 26, 27? But look, I'm 46, I mean, regardless of what age somebody is, look at who we were at that age. What would have the individual have done if they were in that person's shoes? That money, that manipulation, that influence, that adoration. I mean, good God, thank God I never had those temptations when I was 25 years old. Thank God. Oh my God. Like,
Well, yeah, well, that gets into another discussion. How did they find themselves in those roles?
right.
Right. So if we back it up some more, then there's a whole other discussion that I don't know whether we're going to have a chance to talk about it today, but
Mm-hmm.
that says that the members of the Beatles, even going back to Pete Best, Stu Sutcliffe, but primarily John, Paul, George, and Ringo, were on the radar
Right.
very early on to be handled and groomed to become what they became. So, I have looked at this for a long time.
Right.
The active research, Mark, as you know, was 8 years. And then I retired the ongoing research back in November of 2024. But I still occasionally take a look at a few things if it piques my interest. And I'll do interviews like we're doing here to talk about the work. So I have, a deep understanding of the topic. And, once you get into the different components of the control system, the different entities, such as Tavistock, the School of Rome, the World Economic Forum, Bilderberg, the Trilaterals, the Council on Foreign Relations, and on and on and on. Once you understand you have all of these internationalist organizations, then the next step is to understand why are they there? They weren't just created just to do nothing. They're doing something, and they're doing a lot of something behind the scenes. And so, in order to get the behind the scenes work done, that means they have to put a puppet show in front of everybody to keep them distracted from pushing the curtain aside and looking at the great Oz moving the levers. And the Beatles were one of those massive distractions to keep people focused over here while a whole bunch of stuff from a control perspective was being done over there. Right? So, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's a good setup for people who are going to listen to the show to understand, where this is going to go.
Yeah. Look, part of my points today that I wanted to bring to you relate to how we reconcile value from the counterculture. You're a musician as well, aside from your amazing research, man. But my question, and I pose this for myself too, is would I have ever had the dominant relationship that it's played in my life story to music and guitar if I hadn't loved the Beatles and Nirvana, both highly manipulated by social engineering? you know so that bond is real, and the bonds that we've shared over the music are real as well. And they created inspiration. They compelled us to travel, to make art and music, to have bands, to perform. I mean, the list just goes on. To the tangible influence, it's just seen through the worship and the myth making, the fairy tale, as you like to put it, I believe. um, Seeing through all that BS and coming back to our own relationship to counterculture. No, we're not supposed to be sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's not the path to fulfillment. And I think you've presented an overwhelming amount of evidence that suggests that they were, at least John and Paul, were in mind control programs. And who knows how common that is, to like take it to another macro level. Like who knows how many of those people have been tortured or coerced once they got to a certain threshold.
Yeah, and maybe not even tortured or coerced, but they
Right.
were led with a carrot.
Manipulated, right, right.
Yeah, they were groomed and handled. See, what happens is the way the grooming and the handling, the way it works is, a guy doesn't show up and say, "Hey, I'm going to groom and handle you." And what happens is you are connected into people. You're connected into a network, and you're connected into managers and associates and other band members and recording labels and producers. So you have this kludge of people that are all around you. And you get comfortable because this is the company that you keep. This is the company that you're networked into. But what's happening is they're moving you along bit by bit to steer you in a certain direction. Now, you mentioned about how do we reconcile the counterculture and the music. I agree with that. It's You cannot just discard it because, like in my case, I was a huge Beatle freak,
Right.
and the Beatles were the reason why I started to play guitar, why I
Exactly.
started
Exactly.
writing songs, why I started recording and doing all of that. Um, the way I kind of parse it, Mark, is that I didn't know any better back then. I just didn't.
Right.
I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. But now that I know, what I'm able to do is to take the good aspects of it, how it contributed to my life and enriched my life from a music perspective, pick on the music for now, and focus on that. And but also understanding that now that I do have the bigger picture, that the music that we were presented with, not just the Beatles, we're talking about all of the music really from the 60s to counterculture and even going through current day. You mentioned Nirvana and Kurt Cobain,
Right.
same thing, is to understand that that's music with an agenda. See, we were unaware of the agenda. We just didn't think there was an agenda. We just thought, oh, it was great music, and these guys are great musicians and songwriters and so on. And so that's how I segment it. I look at it and say, okay, now I know better. And because I know better now, I can take this piece of the Beatles as an example, or pick any other band that, Jimi Hendrix and so on, Led Zeppelin. These are other bands that I was a
Oh
huge
yeah.
fan of.
Oh yeah.
It goes back to my day, and I can extract from that those pieces of it that helped me as a musician.
And you're part of the baby boomer generation, or are you the early Gen Xer? Or when?
Baby boomer. I'm 67 years old.
Okay. Okay. So you were like in the heart of it. You grew up on the East Coast,
East Coast. Yep.
right? So East Coast baby boomer.
New
Oh
York.
man, yeah, right. It's just like my parents. You were in the heart of that of the American chapter of that.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yes, I hope that made sense. It's you cannot just take it and discard it.
Right.
You have to understand that you absolutely influenced by it because it was everywhere. It was pervasive. It was just a a big part of the reality of the environment that we interacted and existed in and still do.
Yeah, my father my coming of age summer was 1994. That was the summer after my freshman year of high school. I went to the Woodstock 25-year reunion with Arlo Guthrie and Melanie around the same time the Pepsi one was going on, and I went to my first pagan festival. And I was that just like flipped my DNA inside out. I really had a very cinematic summer that season. And my father, when he caught wind of what I was pledging my allegiance to, or starting to really turn into. And he's like, you're going to end up really exploited, man. And he wasn't really speaking from the profound relationship to music. He was kind of myopic about that. But on another hand, like he was right. I was like, oh my God, it really is a machine.
Yeah,
And I had to come to admit that later. I was like, oh yeah, he called that one.
it is a machine.
Right.
Um, there's a control system that lays on top of the reality that most people operate within and what most people believe is reality. They don't understand that there's a whole structure up above that's pulling the strings and controlling things. And And when you fall prey to it, if you don't wake up, then it is going to steer your life,
Yeah.
and it's going to move you in a certain direction. And it's not the direction that you, if you knew better, would want to go to. It wouldn't be that goal line over there. It would be a goal line maybe someplace over here, and you would do things differently. But if you don't understand it, if you don't see it, then it becomes very difficult. And what happens is you're not driving your car, you're a passenger in your car.
Right.
Somebody else is driving the vehicle for you. And the objective is, when you become aware, that's the first step, and then awake, is to realize you're a passenger in your own vehicle.
Yeah,
You know,
that's the like epitome of social engineering's, goal is to have somebody thinking that their choices are their own, or that they're not being influenced by all this elaborate behavioral science. And it's incredible. Just like, when I got involved in the World Trade Center story in my 20s, the amount of hate and belligerence that I received on that, I mean, was mine. I mean, I'm sure that you know exactly the genre of negativity I speak of, and I'm sure that your work has undermined the crutches of certain people's identity and how they grew up and what they believe and what they thought was, it's the same thing for the corrupt part of the government. Oh, what government could do that? Who would believe that? And then you start studying it, you realize that this isn't just about our time in history. This has been going on for centuries.
right,
Yeah.
right. There's a lot of toxicity when you come out and you talk about the truth or you present the truth. People don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because it makes them very, very uncomfortable. Most people want to believe that they have everything figured out and they have it in a box, and there's a nice big bow slapped on top of that box. So if you come along and you say, hey, there are things in that box that you should know about and you should actually have in that box. And as soon as you go down that path, a lot of people just short circuit. They don't want to hear it because they like, look, I have this understood. I love when people say, this is my truth. And I'm like, okay, no, that's your perspective.
Right.
Truth is binary. It's the switch is either on or it's off. You want a dimmer switch. So if you want a dimmer switch, then what you're really saying is you have a perspective, you have an opinion, you have a position, and that's where you want to hang out. That's okay. That's okay. But don't say it's truth because it's not truth.
Right. That's part of decoding social engineering's plan and how they bastardize language, and the whole "my truth, your truth" movement. Like, that is such a Orwellian, mind grab. And what I have to just confide in you, so one of my quirky missions in life is that I'm on a mission to utterly eviscerate the credibility of the phrase "it is what it is." Because
Mhm.
I believe that that is symbolic of what social engineers want us to believe, that things are the result of itself. Things are the way we're told. Oh, blacks, whites, gays, Christians, Jews, Arabs. Just one label, one stereotype. And that's a comprehensive understanding. The table didn't come from the table's a table. The shirt's a shirt. The shirt made itself. It is what it is. And these are the things we're telling our subconscious. I mean, that's the level of the nano level of manipulation that I believe is being inflicted upon us as a species, as a society, as a civilization. And one of the ways we take this back is social emotional intelligence. Another way is through conscious communication. Let's think about what we say. Look at the size of the continents. Are any of these cultures from themselves? Is anything the result of itself? Is it black? Is it white? Are things that like generalized and compartmentalized? No, it's not the way factual history is unfolded. And we can bring that to the story of the Beatles just as much as everything else. Let's get to the real facts of it. What was it really? And let's discuss that, and let's let loose. I shed some tears, man, during checking out your research, man. And I'm old enough now to see how important it is to not compartmentalize vulnerability and pain. It hurts. It hurts. It stings. You know, it's disappointing. There's a whole spectrum of negative emotions. But as you said before, man, there's a liberation. There's a setting free and a weight that's lifted when you don't have to buy into such manipulated concoctions that are meant to deceive people and manipulate, coming from a place of bad intentions. And it doesn't mean that the bond that the music lovers have shared with their friends is bad. It's just like, it just hurts to realize when you've gotten into a fairy tale, whether it's about the government, about certain elements of patriotism, certain icons. It doesn't really matter. I think it's like it's a falling out and a reconstruction of self and identity. So,
Well, it was very difficult for me too, Mark. It was a hard pill for me to swallow because growing up, I've told this story many times on other shows. I was 9 years old in 1968, and I remember bugging my parents to go see Yellow Submarine. And my father finally took my brother and I. My brother's 14 months younger than I am. And it was just pure agony for my dad. But, I was 9 years old. And so, I knew all about the whole Paul is dead, Paul McCartney being replaced conspiracy for a long time. And in fact, back in 1976, I was a junior in high school. I had put together a, it was a demonstration of the Paul is dead clues. And what I did was I had a friend of mine, Adam. He had an older brother, Doug. Doug was about 4 or 5 years older than we were, and he knew all of the clues. He had all of the albums, and it was fascinating. And so my high school was very progressive back in the day. It was on Long Island in New York, and they would allow us to bring in guest speakers to talk about various topics. So I brought Doug in to talk about the Paul is dead conspiracy. And how old was I at that time? 17 years old,
oh wow.
right? So Doug came in and he did the presentation, and it was interesting because I was putting flyers in the hallway, and I wasn't expecting a lot of people to show up, but the day that of the presentation, it was standing room only in the classroom, and it was very fascinating. But even with that, I didn't believe that Paul was replaced or that Paul had died. And we could talk about replacement versus dying in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just thought it was an elaborate marketing gimmick for the Beatles to have some back and forth, some play with their fans. And in fact, when the whole Paul is dead conspiracy really bubbled up in 1969, the sales of Beatle records ticked up. So it did create interest with people wanting to take a look at the clues on the album covers. But it wasn't until 2016 when I bought the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, and I bought the book not really looking to buy the book. It came up as a excuse me, a recommendation on Amazon, and I read the little write-up and I thought, well, this looks interesting. So I bought the book and I started reading it. And the book was actually published in 2009. So I picked it up 7 years after it was published in 2016. And I started reading the book. And the thing with the book that caught my attention, it's classified as historical fiction, but there's a tremendous amount of information in the book. And I remember when I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, this book has a lot of information. And for a book to have this much information, there has to be a pipeline, a source of info coming in. Now, yeah, some of it is fictionalized, like there's fictional threads, and that's in order to maintain the historical fiction and also to maintain plausible deniability as far as the replacement of Paul McCartney. So I'll make this real quick here. I've told this story many times. So what happened was I was relaying this story to Sophia Smallstorm. Sophia is a friend of mine, and I was telling her I was reading this crazy book, and she said, "Oh, you should come on my show and talk about it." And I thought, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that. I mean, the book is 666 pages, there's 66 chapters. I've got 2 hours. How am I going to boil this down to talk about it in 2 hours? But um, she kept insisting. And finally, I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I sat down and I created this huge PowerPoint deck to boil it all down so that I can present it in 2 hours. And I really thought that was going to be the only show I was going to do, because I really had no intentions of pursuing it. I didn't want to become the Paul is dead guy. And then what happened was, a couple of weeks later, Mark Devlin reached out to me through Sophia, I think it was. We're going back a long time ago now. This is back in November of 2016, 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And Mark said, "Hey, Mike, I watched your interview with Sophia. I'd like you to come on my show and talk about the whole Paul is dead thing." And I said, "Oh, okay." So Mark being a friend, I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And toward the end of the show, I said to Mark, "Well, this is going to be the last interview I'm going to do on the whole Paul is dead topic." It was like famous last words. And what happened was, the reason why it stuck was because there was just this curiosity of it, Mark. I was this huge Beatle freak. And I'm thinking, really? Is this really what went down? So I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the key points of the book and either see if they're true or to debunk them. And as I went through this process, what I was finding was I was able to prove out much of what the book was presenting, especially when you realize that the book is encoded. And once you understand how to decode the book, more information comes your way and you're able to have more material to work with, more to investigate, more to research.
I just have to interject something here, man. I had this moment of like self-realization when I was watching you in your various videos, talk about the layers, the acrostical, and before that, there's the word stacking. And then I'm looking at the pages of the bulleted out words, and I'm thinking, do certain people not see this? Is it just having a certain mindset for so many years? I have 20 years in the quote unquote research, whatever you want to call it, field, as far as New World Order, 9/11, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, is this just where I am in terms of this path I've taken? Or is this obvious to most people, the word stacking? Like I just, I was struggling with that as to the layer of subtlety that was meant to be implied. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, I think a lot of people miss it. When you call it out, then they'll see the bolded out words and it forms sentences on each page.
Right,
But even then, once you call it out and you show somebody, the next step is, okay, so what do they do with that
right,
other than read the sentence and just walk away? So the book, it's a Masonic book. It's an encoded Masonic book. Tom Harriet, who is the author slash encoder, um, Tom, he's a Freemason, and he would not have been tapped to to take on that book unless he was in the Brotherhood. They're not going to give that type of
right.
work to somebody outside of the Freemasonic society. So because it's all network and it's again, it's a secret society, it's a big club, and I'm not in it. So uh, so that's how it works. And once you understand it, and it does take time to figure out what's going on in the book, but once you do, and of course, I was networked into a handful of friends who were very good researchers themselves, colleagues,
Mhm.
and we would share information. So it would be through messages, or we at one time we had a Facebook page that was just limited to us, like 4 or 5 of us. So we didn't have to deal with any outside or external noise. And we would share perspectives and ideas and thoughts about what about this page and this passage or this footnote and so on. And so when you put 4 or 5 heads together, smart people, you start to figure out a lot of what's going on there. And to be honest with you, when I reached out to Tom on certain questions that I had, he was very helpful. Now there were some things that he just flat out couldn't talk about because he has signed a non-disclosure agreement, otherwise referred to as an NDA. So there's certain things he couldn't speak about, but when he was able to, or when he was able to kind of point you in the direction that you needed to go to get the information you're looking for, he did that. And so over the years, like it's been 10 years now. So, Tom and I are acquaintances. We're not friends. We don't go out for beers. We don't visit. We don't do any of that stuff. But we're just it's a professional relationship. He respects what I have done on my end, and I respect what he has done on his end. And then whatever communications we have, there hasn't been one in a long time now. I would say probably within the last 9 to 10 months or so, where I had asked him if he's ready yet to come on my show to talk about the book, and I think we might be getting closer to that point. But before that, it was specific questions I had on certain passages in the book to get further clarity on what was really being said there, or what was the message or the clue that we're supposed to be picking up on. And he was always very graceful and very professional about getting back and discussing those things when he could. I just want to put that out there. And by the way, I'm not Tom U. Harriet. Tom is not me. People think we're one and the same person. We are not.
Yeah. I had to go and download the decoding. It was $6.66
The
from
acrostical code?
yeah.
Yes, yes.
So I've been experimenting with that and thumbing through it. But I have to tell you that I've been very suspicious to the point where I'm practically convinced that the Beatles entourage were obligated to do all these hints and clues, and that's their spiritual belief, right? That it's the some people call it predictive programming, but that they're the quote unquote elitists, the global elite, are avoiding their karma by putting these things out in messages, and that if people don't, I think you even said this word for word maybe on one of your talks, that if people don't respond to what they're putting out that's going to happen, then that's their tacit approval. You
Yeah,
know, right, exactly. So it's not it's a combination of influences as to why these things were happening. It there was probably some human emotion and personal thing involved, but they were obligated as per their membership of that society. So it seems.
yes. So we have to understand. People ask me all the time whether it was the Beatles, sitting down and plotting all this stuff out. And my response is no. These were guys that were in their early 20s. They were handled and groomed. They were brought along. They did not write all of their own music. They did not play on all of their recorded tracks. So they had handlers, managers, groomers all around them. And there were people that were very well versed in the clues, the hints, and quite honestly, the occultism that permeated the Beatles. A lot of people don't see it. So was it the Beatles that were up to their eyeballs in occultism, in Aleister Crowley's Thelema, Luciferianism, the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Pan? Uh, no, it was not the Beatles. Now, I do believe that the Beatles were Freemasons, and
Yeah.
low-level Freemasons, right? Maybe the first
You've proved that beyond a shadow of the doubt, man. I've spent a lot of time now. I haven't looked at every single hour that you've done, but several hours of your work, and to me, it's beyond a reasonable doubt.
yeah, they were Masons, and of course Billy took it to a whole other level.
Right.
Billy was a very high level Mason, and today I believe he's in the illuminated degrees, which is above the levels, the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. I think Billy is up and above that, sitting in the illuminated degrees. But in order to make this work, everybody has to be in the club, Mark, as
Yeah.
you know. So you can't have outliers. You can't have people that don't subscribe to this or don't take the oaths. They have to be in that club, and the Beatles were in the club, but that doesn't mean that they were the strategists.
Yeah, but look, man, before years before I ever got to even to the World Trade Center story, my dad had always said that he thought that John had alluded to basically the essence of what you're talking about with the Beatles and what they really were as far as their agenda and their engineering. That he alluded to that in the last Playboy interview, and that
Yeah,
and that was the like flare that went off to say, "Oh, you're done." But I went back and I scanned the interview. I mean, I tried to find something, and I couldn't. Maybe the article was edited. I don't know, or maybe I just missed it. But I couldn't find any real like gotcha moments in his dialogue.
Well, if you go back to the Rolling Stone interview that was done, I think it was in 1971. It was John that said that the Beatles were a myth, McCartney was a
Right.
myth, and Bob Dylan was a myth. So, and then John, of course, on his Imagine album, wrote the song "How Do You Sleep," which is the quintessential Paul is Dead song. And he's telling you right there in an encoded way everything that went down, everything you need to know if you if the switch went off in your head, it's like, okay, what is he talking about? And if those freaks was right when they said you were dead. All right, that's the first clue right there. So John was he was he was walking the cusp sometimes with regard to uh, letting the cat out of the bag and not letting the cat out of the bag. He walked a fine line, and so and also I think George Harrison to a certain degree too also would make comments, or he would make comments that would, if you really listen, you would think, okay, well, why did he say that? It's like when the induction into the Hall of Fame, I think it was, and George said, "We all loved Paul."
Right. And it was so subtle, the D.
Yes,
He it was that masterful disclosure that you talk about, man. It was like, it was so subtle, man, but it was there.
but it was past tense.
Right, right, exactly.
It was past tense, and then he said, "Well, Paul had the script or whatever. It's unfortunate he didn't show up." He was talking about Billy
Yeah.
because he had the script and so on. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there were clues that were dropped by the Beatles themselves. Now, Billy's been dropping clues since day one
Well,
about,
oh, sorry. I just have to interject. We're at the
yeah,
2 minute mark. Just wanted to give you a
okay.
heads up. And before we take, it's going to make a 10-minute break here. Um, I wanted to get your opinion about Albert Goldman's book, The Lives of John Lennon. If you think it was, I read that 20 years ago, and I was like, this is complete and total A to Z BS. And did you ever like encounter that? And do you think there's any resonance or parallels, or you
Oh,
think
man.
you think it's irrelevant because he was just some dude making up stuff? But the level of detail that he had, I was like, this seems like hogwash, man. But I didn't know if that ever came into any of your research, if that was ever relevant.
It's a long, long time ago, right?
Right.
Yeah. During the break, let me just mull it over a little bit and see if I can remember
Oh,
a
the
little bit
things.
about what was in the book.
Oh, dude, the things he asserts are so foul and dark that he claims um, that John was responsible for Stu Sutcliffe's death and that he kicked him in the head several times during an altercation. You
Yeah, I
know,
heard that story. Yeah.
right, right. And there was some other things too, and I was just like, yeah, I was thinking about it, trying to see if there was any connecting pieces there. But anyway, it's a side note. But so we're about to get cut off here. Part one of our show is complete. Thank you so much, and I'm gonna hit you back in 10 minutes with that next link.
Okay, Mark.
Thanks, bud.
Oh, yes, I do remember it.
Yeah, man, I didn't know.
It
Apparently
was
he did.
40 years ago.
Right, he did the same thing about. He wrote something similar about Elvis, I believe. That guy Albert Goldman, and
Yes.
right. So that was the first time I had ever seen, regardless of what percentage of fiction and BS is involved in his work. That was the first time I ever saw anything presented negative about the Beatles. So that that took some time to digest, and I was like, nobody seems to be like backing this guy up about what he says, but I hadn't come into um, really studying social engineering and the occult as far as like World Trade Center story, et cetera. So, but this leads me to another point that I was very curious to pick your brain about, man.
Well, I just want to say, Mark, that with regard to the book, because now I've got my memory refreshed. I mean, there are aspects of that book that I wouldn't discount.
Right.
That's all I'll say.
Right, exactly. We weren't, we've been sold a story, and people are as complicated and dualistic as ever. And it's quite possible that those that seem angelic and have a nice voice and can look nice and have a nice harmony can also do dastardly things, man. Mm, you know,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, what you see publicly is, in all likelihood, not that person or their persona
right.
when they're out of the public spotlight. And that's where people really trip up because they will look at entertainers, celebrities, and musicians, and they see them when they're entertaining. And that's an act. That's a persona. That's a character that they play.
Right.
And then people want to believe that, well, I saw Brad Pitt in this movie, and I think that's the kind of person he really is. I'm not
Right.
picking on Brad Pitt. I'm just
Right.
saying, using him as an example. But you don't know Brad Pitt. You don't know Paul McCartney. You don't know John Lennon.
Right.
You don't know them. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt. That's why going back to Goldman's book, um, yeah, there was a lot of stuff in there that really shook the ground for a lot of people who were John Lennon acolytes,
Hmm.
right? They put him up on a podium, they put him up on a pedestal and they hero worshiped him. And then when Goldman came out with his book, he's like, well, you know what? There's a lot of dark stuff here and I'm going to spell it out for you. So that's why I was saying I wouldn't discount it. It's been a long time since I've looked at that book. I would have to go back and reread it.
Oh man, I was living in Brooklyn in Park Slope when I encountered the book, and I had an epic travel trip, man. I took an Amtrak to Colorado to visit my friend stationed at a ranger house outside of Golden, Colorado. So that on that trip is when I read the book, and I was just like, I mean, I was just like walking around like, gaping mouth, like, what, what,
Yeah.
just couldn't believe it. Anyway, but uh, what I was thinking of though, on a slightly larger scale is, do you still get head checks and like rearrangements of your understanding? I mean, you've got who knows how many hours of research and how many different pieces of work you've done. But I was thrown through a loop when I saw your interview with what's her name, Sharon, that wrote Forbidden Fruit.
Yeah.
I forget her last name in the book.
Clemens.
Right, thank you, Sharon Clemens. Right, and what a great interview. That was amazing. But she just blew my mind talking about the Seattle connection, and then I was like, I wonder what Mike thinks about this because you were, like it's not that you guys seem to have any contention, but I was wondering in my head, I was like, do you guys agree on this, or are you kind of like open to it, or you just see it as her point of view and you have your own point of view? And as far as did Paul die in Washington State? Did he die in England with MI5?
Yeah, I was open to it. Sharon did extraordinary research. And here's the thing, Mark. My position with regard to Paul being replaced, I lean toward Paul being dead.
Right.
So I'll just say that. Now, is it possible that Paul didn't die and he was simply replaced? He was just swapped out? That could be as well. I don't get as hung up on whether he died or not as maybe some other researchers because my take is, well, I'm taking it to a different level. My research has to do with them, as I mentioned earlier in our discussion, as a monumental social engineering initiative. So for me, it really didn't matter whether Paul was there or Paul wasn't there. The Beatles were tasked, they were put together to perform a certain function, certain responsibilities within that social engineering initiative called the Beatles. Now, that being said, I don't, was Paul, if Paul died, and again, I do believe that Paul, in all likelihood, has passed away. He's not with us and he hasn't been with us for a long time. Was it in England? Could be. Was it in Seattle? It could be. We don't know. I mean, the prevailing theory says he died in a car crash, right? And then there's the other theory, which actually comes out of memoirs, and other people have had this before, memoirs, but memoirs expands on it, that his death was the result of a ritual sacrifice, death for success, right? For the success of the band, the longevity of the Beatles, and what the Beatles were going to be able to accomplish in the mind of the occultist. Blood sacrifice gets those things done. Okay, now people can either believe that or not believe it, but The world is run by occultists. So
Right. Yeah, for sure. And to speak, to reinforce the point, I get what you're saying. The impact of Paul and what he was meant to be, from the standpoint of social engineers, is equal whether he passed away in England, uh, as a result of MI5 running him off the road, and he had a passenger in his car and all that version, or whether what Sharon was saying about him being taken to that remote location in Washington State, and the
right.
Beatles were dropping clues about it, supposedly. Regardless, it didn't change one iota of his impact and their mission with regard to that. So it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing it would change, the significance of Paul passing as a result of a ritual sacrifice, one could argue that from an occultist perspective, they would say that the death as a result of sacrifice, ritual sacrifice, was the driver behind how the Beatles catapulted to where they ended up, the trajectory that took place from um, from the very beginnings. Because in memoirs it says that the Faustian bargain, if there was a Faustian bargain, the pact was in October of 1963, and so that Faustian bargain is what made them take off. So from an occultist perspective, that's what I'm trying to explain here. They would say, well, the death was significant because as a ritual sacrifice, it accomplished what we wanted it to accomplish, which was to make them bigger than life.
Yeah, and I could also see, to kind of play devil's advocate for a minute when talking about the real point was his impact, but actually to take the other side of that argument, in my mind anyway, it could also be seen as a template. So then we say Brian Jones, and we start looking at it historically, like, um, what's her name, Kristen Plath from Hole, died shortly after Cobain. Like,
Yes.
right, like so this is a template that could be attributed to. Like, this is a strategy. This is a template. This is how this world operates. And then once you start understanding from that point, you see how many of those stories actually exist. So I could see it as significant from that standpoint.
Yeah. So that's from that perspective, we would say that Paul dying, if it was a ritual sacrifice from an occultist perspective, is significant. However, like I said, my work doesn't focus as much on that. Of course, you have to touch on it because it's the main cog in getting started with the whole Paul is dead McCartney conspiracy,
Right.
Paul being replaced. So that's why I phrase it as Paul was replaced. And when people ask, well, do you think like he's still alive? And then I'll say, no, I don't think he was, but I don't want to get all jammed up in people going back and forth. He's dead, he's alive, he's dead,
Right.
he's alive. It just becomes unproductive and it's a wheel spinning exercise. So I just avoid that. And that's really not the focus of my research. That's why I just kind of leapfrog over it.
Right. I've noticed that, very recently, within the last maybe even 48 hours, I saw a trailer for a new uh, Paul McCartney documentary called
Yeah.
Man on the Run. And the,
Yeah.
the thing is that I keep noticing, not just there on the trailer, but I keep noticing everywhere. It's your name pops up. People are plugging Billy, 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 Billy. That there's waves of that infiltrating almost everything I see, with relation to, like, YouTube is the medium that I swim in the most. So that's where I'm at usually as far as online. So yeah, I'm noticing that more and more, that people are plugging that more, man. And some, your name, there's some other people's names that get put out there. And yeah, I think that's it's an encouragement in the sense that we have more of these dialogues without people taking the tone of the supposed expert and ostracizing others when when they're just coming from what they know. I mean, not from what they know, excuse me, from what they think. I did the same thing when I was a teenager. My parents would tell me about social engineering, the government. I'd be like, that's so dumb. Why do you believe, and I was just being immature and talk about what I think without having the education to know. And this is it's an archetype of experience, an archetype of personality. Like, you know, you're helping people grow into a greater sense of self, for one of the most important cultural influences of our lifetime, and that's a gift from heaven, man. I mean, yeah. So we're so blessed for all the time you put into it, man. And I know that it's you're not some raging egomaniac where you think it's just all about you. I mean, I appreciate that, man. That there's social emotional intelligence to be harvested from this story, and in my estimation, social emotional intelligence is the premier ability of the 21st century. Without that, we're subject to falling prey to these social engineers and their strategies to get us to project everything and anything onto the next person, group, ideology, etc. Oh, hence come back into my it is what it is mission. Oh, those blacks, those Christians, those gays, those Jews, those Muslims, those Arabs, those whatever, those conspiracy theorists. It doesn't ever stop, man. It goes all day with those empty labels and stereotypes that do not demand knowing, but will default to thinking and having an opinion and treating that as credible, man. So this is really like through the looking glass on on steroids. So
Yeah.
yeah, man.
Yeah. Well, we have to come to grips with the fact that the majority of people do not critically think. And I don't like saying these things,
Right.
but if you want proof of this, all you need to do is to run a platform like a YouTube channel and uh, and present material like I do on the Beatles or the McCartney conspiracy or 9/11 or the moon landings, or you just pick something, pick the
Oh yeah.
JFK assassination and so on, and you will get very quickly a taste of where a majority of the population sits from a critical thinking perspective, which is that they're not sitting in critical thinking. It's very emotions based. It's like I was saying earlier, Mark. Most people want to believe that they have all of reality completely figured out and they've got it in their nice little box with the bow slapped on top. And so when you or I or anybody else comes along and says, well, you know what, there's more that you need to know, there's more that you need to put in your box, and there's some stuff in that box you need to take out. Nope, they don't want to hear about that stuff. We talked about this before. So, when I do this work, there I do it because I like researching, period.
Right.
I'm not here to convince anybody of anything because I know, and I learned a long, long time ago, if you think you're going to shout your way through this and you're going to get people to listen, forget it. The only time people get it is when the time comes when they're ready to receive the information and to sit with it and start to think through it. Before that time, if you're trying to debate with somebody endlessly, you're trying to convince them, you're having arguments with them, you're screaming and yelling, that is not going to work. And that's why with my YouTube channel, I don't even get into it in the comments section. If people come onto the comments section and they want to be belligerent and nasty and toxic, you're out of here.
Right.
You're out of here because we have to raise the bar on these discussions. When we allow the the nonsense that typically permeates conspiracy research or alternative research, all the naysayers and the belligerents and all that stuff, all that does is to contaminate the waters. It pollutes the waters. And what these people are trying to do, whether they know it or not, is trying to bring the conversation down, to bring it down to a level, down to their level, to a level of ignorance, to a level of stupidity.
Oh
And
man,
we can't allow it. We
I've
can't
probably
allow it.
lost 3 out of 4 people since I had my awakening at 26.
Yeah.
Through the September 11th story, 3 out of 4 people at least I've
Yep.
lost because of it, and I just accepted that. And it's like I wasn't an innocent person, So it's like I wasn't a squeaky clean choir boy anyway. So I had a lot of growing to do on my own, but just to remember that we've all, no matter how smart or informed we are on any topic, there's always something that we don't know about or that we can learn more about. And
Correct.
all of us have believed something that's not true. When Al Gore's propaganda film came out, I think that was 2004, 2005, Inconvenient Truth. I believe that face value, no question. And I look back now and I laugh as if that's, political, intellectual puberty. And I'm like, I believe that completely face value, didn't question it at all in that year that came out. And now I have to laugh at that. Be like, yeah, got to re-examine the motives there. So, regardless of the theme, man, it's like we've all been wrong. We've all believed something that's, clearly not true. And as they say, hindsight is 2020. And this is part of the learning curve of being a person. You'll have something figured out 20 years before somebody else, and somebody else will have something figured out 20 years before you will. And it's like, if we could just accept that gracefully, that we're all, just as like incredible and genius as we are, with flaws and defects and sins and things that bring us back down to a more humble state of mind, man. It's like we've all done something wrong, and it's okay, man. It's okay to bring this vulnerability to the table. Um, we're full of knowledge and enlightenment and wisdom just as much as we are. We've suffered, and we've been through things, and we've deceived ourselves and others, and this is just part of our salvation, man. Um, and I think that these topics really have a fuse lit when you connect with it, man. It's a quantum leap, and that's what this has been for me. That's what to contend with your work has been a quantum leap for me. And I have that same feeling of soul activation that I did when I first started studying 9/11, and that was in 2006 when I first caught that fire. And here I am. I have a life that pushed me to live in the rainforest here, man. That's exactly how I got here. That's the level of inspiration and change that was born out of this shift in consciousness and understanding. And be like, yeah, there's groups of people that don't want us to succeed, that don't want us to self-actualize, you know.
No, absolutely. And you're on a great point as far as anybody who says that they have it all figured out
Right.
is somebody that you should pay very little attention to because it's an evolving process.
Yeah.
And even myself, I mean, when I come across information that is different and challenges the information that I had before, I have to evaluate the new information. You just can't shut it down because as soon as you do that, then you're no longer doing research.
Yeah.
I mean, then you're gatekeeping your own message, right?
It's brand label consciousness. It's saying this is right or is not right because of the brand label and not the actual details of it. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very important to have an open mind, and when new information, new data comes forth, that you look at it and you weigh it and you assess it against what you already have. And if it means that you have to change something up and you have to, make a right-hand turn, then you need to do that because otherwise what happens is, as a researcher, you lose credibility,
Right.
right? People will start calling you, I can't stand this term, but they'll start calling you a limited hangout, right? So uh, a limited hangout, by the way, is any person or any channel that presents something that somebody else doesn't agree with. you know.
Right. The confirmation bias. I'm sure there's all sorts of terms.
Yes.
Uh, right. People lose their way, man. I have to. It's not about singling out people. I call it the Alex Jones stage, man, and that's how I got on
Yeah, me too.
at 26. And now I no longer subscribe to him, and now I have to say that I don't believe his motives to be genuine anymore.
No.
So yeah, that was a radical transformation for me, man. And that's a perfect example of brand label consciousness. Whereas when I was younger, I would have, because of certain information that he had that was credible, I would have just been like, oh well, here's a credible source, and I saw how it was starting to fall into that trap, and that is a trap. And anybody that's listening, please be careful. The social engineers are pervasive and have influence in all facets of life. I saw it at Ground Zero in 2008. I was working with an organization to do a ballot referendum, and we were petitioning. And we went to the vigil, and there were a group of guys in tinfoil suits, and it was a perfect. They were plants. It was a perfect opportunity for the media to pick up and say, "These people here, they think that the official story of 9/11 is fake and false, and look what they believe." And it was so obvious. They were like bouncing around, doing what they could to get attention. They were looking as outlandish as you could imagine
Yeah.
at a Ground Zero vigil. Um, right, I'll never forget that, man. That was in 2008. But yeah, it burned a lesson into my psyche, man. To be careful and to keep it relevant to what we can do, because there's always negativity that we could find and dredge up, right? But at the end of the day, we still have to live our lives. We still have to make our choices, man. And it's like, who wants to go through their life glum because of our icons being revealed to be controlled puppets?
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, what you get down to is don't have icons and don't worship. You
Yeah,
know, don't do it. Don't idol worship.
right.
Uh, you know, what you have to do is focus on yourself and focus on your own soul development
Yes.
and what you have to accomplish in your life and do things that are productive and creative and challenging and are beneficial not only to yourself but to your family and your friends. That's how we have to look at it. See, they want everybody to externalize. They want everybody to go out and have a hero,
Yeah.
have some god, some demigod that we need to worship and get on our knees. And this goes for all of these guys like Elon Musk in the Silicon Valley. It goes for your musicians, it's your entertainers, it's your celebrities. We can go on and on and on. And that's the thing. When you do that, what's happened is you have created, I'm talking about, the masses, you have created a Pied Piper. They put the Pied Piper in play, but the Pied Piper doesn't have followers unless you follow. And so what we don't want to have, or what you don't want to be doing, this is my perspective, is to be following Pied Pipers. Because you're not being yourself. You're not being genuine to yourself. Again, you're externalizing. You've got to come in. You have to do your inner work. If you don't do your inner work, then there's a whole lot of stuff that you're going to be missing out in life.
Yeah, right. And those of us that come from some kind of dysfunctional childhood, most of us in some way or shape or another, we're in the crosshairs. Not on an individual level, but as an archetype, we're in the crosshairs. Just like you pointed out that John and Paul fit a profile that they most likely. I agree with your assessment that they were on the radar from an early age and were most likely in mind control programs. And the numerology behind like the meeting of John and Paul, the timing, the dates, all that. That was well uh, people were doing a lot of work to manifest that. And the counterculture in my time, child in the 80s, teenager in the 90s, had a similar bent to the MTV generation to capture all the latchkey kids
Yes.
into this sense of like heroism, whereas a lot of pretty dark and dastardly things happen in that scene too. There's a list of names um, that fell prey to a certain culture and lifestyle that's part and parcel to the culture. So yeah, man, it's a we're not here to indict being alive and having love for art and creativity and music. It's a call to examine your self-respect, examine your self-esteem, examine your social emotional intelligence. Examine things and be careful of brand label consciousness, man. uh, Somebody you think is X, Y, or Z words that are unflattering could be the person that has the research that unlocks something in your own life, but you might not have considered it because they're white, black, Asian, Jew, Christian, whatever. Like life is bringing us the tools, and it's up to us to engage those tools, man. And that's how I feel about discovering your work. I feel like it's a series of tools for a quantum leap for me to take the next step in my life. And I'm at a stage where I'm growing beyond the hedonism that I became part of my signature of being the counterculture guy. And it's just it's not like moral. It's not sustainable for health. It doesn't create upward mobility that I'm looking for. And so I've been leaving it behind in stages. And this is like, we just finished the year of the snake in Chinese astrology, and I feel like this is like the head of it. You know what I mean? Like if anything could symbolize what the counterculture has meant to me, it would be the relationship to the Beatles and their music. So um, yeah, this is like drinking the elixir that you wake up in a different world, man.
Yeah, and you mentioned culture, Mark. And so what was handed to us, this goes back to my point about being genuine to yourself, doing your inner work. What the control system has done is to remove you from your ancestral culture and to give you this homogenized nonsense called pop culture.
Right.
And so you attach yourself to this pop culture. And so when you do that, then your real culture, your ancestral culture, in other words, if you're Italian, if you're German, if you're Greek, if you're Mexican, just pick a lineage. You've moved away from that. Many people have moved away from that. They don't really have that connection anymore. So when you don't have that connection anymore, then your individualism has disappeared. And now what's happened is they've moved you into the collective bucket. Now it's collective. And the collective is sitting in a homogenized culture called pop culture, which consists of hamburgers, hot dogs, Netflix, ball games, celebrities, entertainers, bands, and so on. And so many people, that is what they live for. That becomes their identity. And that's a big issue I popped up against with the Beatles because, I mean, at one point, the Beatles were part of my identity too. I loved them. My brother used to come to my house and say, God, your house is like a Beatles shrine. Had all this memorabilia, you know. But what happens is people do identify with these pop culture icons. And so when you question it, they become very upset because what's happening is really they're sensing a piece of their identity is being pulled away from them. And it makes them very, very uncomfortable. But here's the good news, right? I used to be there and I'm not there anymore, especially when we're talking about the Beatles. And guess what? There's life after the Beatles.
Right.
You
Right.
don't need them in your life. You really don't.
Right. Yeah, the music can still mean something. The bonds that it created, there could be a legacy. You have a song or something or an album that was part of a soundtrack to a certain period, pivotal period of time. But like you said, the worship of it, the adoration of it, the blind faith of it, like that all has to be discarded because it's very unhealthy and it's following people that have a negative intention for society for their own benefit. That's about as malevolent as it gets. Um, but I think you still have a relationship to music, right? I mean, I've noticed that you have guitars sometimes,
Yes.
right? You're still, and then you do on your videos. You have like an opening intro and outro. Is that you playing, or is that just a track in general? Or
Oh, years ago, it used to be me playing. And then what happened was I started just using royalty-free, copyright-free
right, right,
tunes from YouTube, right? Just to get the bumper music in there. No, but I'm very active musically. In fact, I just released a new song, and I'm working on a another album. What I've done is I've gone back in time, back 40, 45 years, and what I'm doing is reimagining and re-recording songs that I did when I was in my 20s.
wow,
And I'm 67 now, so it's 40, 45 years ago. So that's a project I'm working on now. But yes, to answer your question, Mark, I'm still very active with music.
right. We'll have to if it's meant for people to interact with, man, you'll have to plug some links for me to put on the description box when I upload the video a little bit later.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I would love to check that out personally, regardless. So there's a little bit less than 10 minutes. I wanted to pick some thoughts from you about the future and your relationship to media. And would you ever consider doing a film or a documentary? I mean, you said you retired the research, and I get that. You'll still speak on it. So thank you so much for like making some time. I know you said that it's like there's life after the Beatles. It doesn't have to be your entire existence, but you are a leading researcher in what I guess it's called Beatles occultology. Does that sound like
Yeah.
the right term? Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Right, right. Okay, very good. So, um, I want to have a future in media, man. That's what I'm up to. I'm writing my first book. It's called I Am Gen X, and it's a collection of short stories of me from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, basically just struggling to become an adult and adventures and insights. But I really want to convert one or more of the stories into the cinematic equivalent of the great American novel. And did you ever see the film American Pop? Ralph Bashki?
No,
The
I don't think I did.
Okay, if you make a note to check that out,
I
man.
will.
It's a
I will.
music. It's somebody. It's a music lovers. It's a requirement. So essentially, the quick summary of the film is that it follows like four generations of a Russian immigrant family that started in New York at the turn of the 20th century and the relationship to the music industry. So it's a amalgamation of so many decades of music history. So it's historical fiction, and it essentially tells the great American novel in a film. And I've always wanted to do something like that with my own family story. I'm the grandson of immigrants who had to marry against their will. My mother grew up in a difficult situation because of that, and that turned her towards the counterculture. Imagine that. And the same thing happened to me in my life. My troubles in my childhood pushed me right into the Seattle Sound grunge movement and guitar. I mean, it was just like one equaled the other. And the same thing happened to her. And it took a while for both of us for that to really even out to something that was more credible. You know what I mean? So it was to both of our benefits ultimately, but there was a journey there. And oh man, just to be able to express that through art and film. So if you're ever open to it, man, I would encourage you wholeheartedly to share your story, share how you grew up with the music, whatever form it takes. I think it's going to be something that was really deep in enrichment, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. I mean, who knows how much time you want to invest into the world of musicology at this point, but it seems like you have a lot to share. You grew up in a New York that so many people don't understand how it really was, man.
Right.
The old New York, the real New York, the pre gentrification, pre woke, pre Disney, better purchasing power for the dollar. You know, so I guess my questions get a bit rambling, but do you have plans to do more media? Is the essence of the question,
Not really. Right now, my focus is really on my music,
right?
and like I said, I'm working on a an album right now, and I want to get that out. So my focus is on that. And as you know, as far as the Beatles go, Mark, it was I got to the point of diminishing return. So I felt
Right.
like, I got what I needed to get out, what I wanted to talk about. I took it full circle. I brought it back to the Tavistock Institute, back to the Frankfurt School, back into the Marxist ideology. I did all of that. And so as far as media and the Beatles, if that's your question, I don't see a whole lot on the horizon. I mean, I will continue to do interviews here and there because
Right.
people are still discovering my work.
Yeah.
And then they contact me, and I don't want to say, I mean, sometimes I will decline an interview depending upon what I've got going on in life. But many times I'll say, okay, I'll come on and I'll talk about it because, if people are taking the time to find the stuff and to find my research and to look at it and then have questions, then, I will continue to answer those questions when people have them.
Yeah, man. So as far as your music concerned, are you writing as far as lyrics too, or
Yeah, I do everything. I've been writing original music since the late 70s. And, um, that's what I do. I write the lyrics, I write the music, I do all of my own arranging, all my own mixing and all that. So
yeah,
it's just it's a one man show. I have right to my right here. I have a 24 track Tascam digital recorder, and that's what I use.
you live in the boroughs still?
No, I live in North Carolina now.
Oh, okay,
I'm
okay,
down in the Raleigh area.
okay. Well, I'm as much as New York is probably the thing I love the most in the United States. I'm glad for you. I went back for the first time since I moved to Costa Rica in 13 years in 2023, and I was just shocked. I was just shocked. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. So I took the train over to my family's neighborhood where I lived in Brooklyn and Park Slope, and it's just like it's gone. The vestiges of the working class heritage there, the immigrant families that raised so many kids,
Yeah.
it's just largely gone, for the most part. And that's passage of time, but it's also an orchestrated attack on family. But
Yes.
man, to come back to the music, man, if I break through in this film thing like I want to, man, I might have to come back to you to work out a deal to have you make some music, man. Because I dig your vibe, man. I dig your disposition and the way that you explain things and express yourself is something that I find very coherent and concise. And it's kind of like aligning yourself with a teacher in a sense of like, okay, this person's personality uh, works and resonates for me. So I've been well grateful for the whole experience of it, including today, man.
No, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate having the discussion and for you inviting me onto your podcast.
Yeah, well, look, man, I'm inhabiting a tilapia bar restaurant right now that's got nobody in it because the owner had to go out today. But yeah, I live on this weird remote site up in the mountains and overlooking the Pacific Ocean and the rainforest of Costa Rica. And there's a long story there as to how I got here, and it was all seeded by the 9/11 story. And I feel like I may end up doing more media projects that relate to this whole idea of exposing the mechanics of uh, the icons and stars of the Western world, man. I mean, it's just too it's too influential of a topic for the life that I've lived to not want to keep riffing on it more. So I think I'm gonna have to keep on with trying to create something and maybe do a little more writing about it. But yeah, man. So essentially, we're coming to the end of our time together. It's less than a 2 minute countdown. I just wanted to briefly review for anybody that's new to you and your work. I'm going to recap. Um, we've just spent the day talking with Mike Williams, who's a phenomenal Beatles occultology researcher. He has countless hours of well researched, thorough information. You can come to your own conclusions there, but he's got 2 YouTube channels. And would you just give us the like rundown of your how people find you, whether it's music or your research?
All you need to do is go to my hub website. It's sageofquay.com, sageofquay.com. And you'll even find links to my music website, which is laboroflovemusic.com. So if you want to go there separately, it's laboroflovemusic.com for the music. And that's it. That's it. And I run a blog. I run 2 blogs. I've been running them for about 13, 14 years, daily posts. And I also have a Twitter account, X.
All right, man. Well, look, I'm gonna have to plug all that in the description, but the base of it is the Sage of Kwai.
Yes,
Did I say it right? Kwai.
almost. Sage of Quay. It's
Man,
okay.
I'm hard headed. Sorry, bro.
sageofquay.com.
All
That's
right,
okay.
man. All right, well, look, this is the big peace out, man. Much love from Costa Rica. God bless you, man, and thank you so much for sharing your time, bud.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, peace out, bud.
Bye bye.
Take care. Ciao.